is a fantastic privilege to have been invited to give this talk to help launch Nigel's new book, especially because over a number of years now, and hopefully Nigel won't mind me saying this, but over a number of years now, Nigel has actually become a remarkably close friend to me, and I've benefited so much from his experience, and he has become a quite important mentor sort of figure as well, especially at this early career stage in which I find myself. So hopefully this is the first of many occasions where I can be able to repay some of that small debt of, some small portion of the huge debts of gratitude that I actually owe to Nigel for his help, his guidance, and his friendship over the last few years. So my talk this morning, hopefully as well, will bridge the topics which have already been broached by Nigel in his examination of 14th century Hereford church architecture, and then also perhaps stray into Tanya's area of a couple of wall paintings and things. So hopefully I'll cover it over. Likewise, this lecture was I was approached really fairly late on, because another speaker couldn't make it. And so this is, while I say this is the iconography of England's two St Thomases in Herefordshire, I must admit we do stray out of the county and out of the diocese from time to time to Somerset and Cambridgeshire and a couple of other places. But hopefully this will all make sense in terms of looking at the iconography, particularly Cantaloupe iconography. Now, as Nigel has already said, the year 2020 actually marks several major anniversaries, not only for St Thomas de Cantilupe at Hereford Cathedral, which is marking the 700th anniversary of his canonization, but all over the country. So at Canterbury, we have the 850th anniversary of the martyrdom of St Thomas Becket on the 29th of December, 1170. And it's also the 800th anniversary of the translation of his remains in 1220. At Lincoln, there is the 800th anniversary of the canonization of St Hugh of Lincoln in 1220. At Bury St Edmunds, there's the millennium, celebrating their 1000th anniversary of the foundation by King Canute in 1020. And at Salisbury, likewise, it's the 800th anniversary since their foundation stone was laid in 1220, resulting in the cathedral's move from Old Sarum to its present site. So necessarily, from the title of my paper and from the stained glass window image that you'll have already seen, and I will touch upon again slightly in this paper, I will be placing a heavy focus on England's two St Thomases. So in these general terms, it is hard not to make comparisons, really. When you look at both Thomases, it's hard not to make comparisons between St Thomas of Hereford and St Thomas of Canterbury and their respective reputations. So both Thomases held the office of Chancellor of the Realm. Both quarrelled with barons and lords. Both disagreed with policies of a king named Henry. Both took a self-imposed exile in Normandy. Both wore hair shirts, and both were the centre of a major cult performing hundreds of miracles. Becket's miracle collection is the largest extant miracle collection that we have of an English saint, totaling some 655 odd miracles, and Cantaloupe's is the second largest of any medieval English saint, totaling some 460, 461, somewhere about there. So I mean, these things barely scratch the surface in terms of similarities, and yet there are such drastic differences between them too, such as placement in church hierarchy, the locations in which the cults operated, how Becket became an international sort of cult, whereas Cantaloupe remained relatively local and relatively national to England and Wales, a bit in Ireland as well. But these comparisons were certainly known to the medieval clergy in the Diocese of Hereford. It's here where we get these things that St Thomas Cantaloupe's cult is very much moulded on that of his namesake. So imagery at the shrine in the north transept placed the prelates near each other, paintings and stained glass windows. There's other things, texts, Limoges reliquaries, all of these sorts of things which place them all near to each other. So it's an incredibly important comparison to make. So it makes sense really to start with, start our journey really at Hereford and some of the texts actually that are produced. So as already noted, Cantilupe's cult was moulded by his successors as that of a second Thomas Becket, a second Becket. So it results in these texts and in series of images representing the two prelates together. So, for example, you have this from the late 13th century Hereford Breviary, which is added to throughout the Middle Ages. But on the establishment of Cantilupe's feast day as the 2nd of October, it receives a new office. So the responsory for the feast of the office places Cantilupe among the saintly pantheon of other Thomases. The first Thomas, the apostle, became the teacher of the peoples. The second, St Thomas of Canterbury, underwent the punishment of the sword. This one, St Thomas of Hereford, completed the office of shepherd, providing himself as double sacrifice. Although he did not suffer the sword bodily, he achieved martyrdom in his heart. Likewise, in Bishop Adam Orleton's letter regarding Cantilupe's very first feast day, he is made out to be a successor to St Thomas the Apostle's martyrdom. So again, this idea of Cantilupe the martyr going in these footsteps, reflecting the glory of St Thomas the Apostle and St Thomas Becket. So both texts stress explicitly that Cantilupe is as much a martyr as the other two Thomases, despite not suffering the same fate. We also get this apocryphal tale by the 17th century Jesuit Richard Strange, who wrote the only hagiography that we have of Thomas Cantilupe, which emphasizes this story that when Cantilupe was a child, he went to see his uncle, Walter de Cantilupe, Bishop of Worcester, from 1237 to 66, and expressed a wish to follow in the footsteps of his brothers and become a knight. And this is when Walter turned round and replied that the boy would grow up, that the young Thomas would grow up to fight under the colours of the glorious martyr St Thomas, securing Cantilupe's sort of placement, really, almost as a second St Thomas in some ways. So even the witness testimony in 1307 places Cantilupe specifically as this kind of successor to Becket, focusing on Cantilupe's defence of the rights of the Church of Hereford against baronial and archiepiscopal encroachment, and just paints him as the successor. So moving on to the actual iconography and things, those of you who have been to Hereford or know Hereford quite well will know that we have in the cathedral there a Becket Limoges reliquary. Now, it's associations like this which really make the connections explicit. So Becket's cult ends up being active in Hereford at some point during the episcopate of William de Vere, Bishop of Hereford, between 1186 and 1198. Hereford gained possession of its Limoges reliquary, depicting the Becket martyrdom and containing a relic of the saint. Others, such as Virginia Raguin and Naomi Reed Klein, have commented that the Limoges reliquary of Thomas Becket suggests that when Cantilupe's cult came about, there would be a synoptic relationship between the two. They would go off each other because Becket is revered at Hereford already as a precursor to the way that they wanted to set Cantilupe up. And likewise, Richard de Swinfield, as a man who apparently hails from Swingfield in Folkestone in Kent, would have known of Becket's cult, would have known how wide its reach was, and would have perhaps moulded his predecessor Cantilupe on that. So it's possible that we could argue straight off the bat that when Cantaloupe's shrine is established in the north transept of Hereford Cathedral on Maunday, Thursday, 1287. That the Becket reliquary also acts as this kind of focal point where the iconographical associations are starting to be made. You would go on this pilgrimage route around the cathedral, go to the north transept, go to wherever Becket's reliquary is, and say your prayers to both St Thomas's. And it's in this vein, and I'm really sorry about the quality of this picture. It's the best that I could do in terms of scanning in images and then trying to blow them up into a PowerPoint. But although no traces now remain, the 17th century antiquaries Thomas Dingley and William Stukely both sketched images of wall paintings, which were above Cantilupe's tomb in the north transept of the cathedral, depicting Cantilupe and Becket stood near each other. Becket, as you will see from the very blurry image on the right, is holding a cross staff, an archiepiscopal cross staff. His, I don't know whether or not you can make it out, but his vestments are emblazoned with Lombardic T's, while Cantilupe is holding a crozier with a foliate head, and his vestments are emblazoned with the Cantaloupe arms of a Jesant de lis, a leopard's head impaled upside down on a fleur-de-lis. The dates of these specific images are unfortunately unknown, but it is likely that they are contemporary to the contemporary depictions from the Middle Ages, from the time of Cantilupe's cult, to the original setting. And it's in a part of the cathedral that had actually, at the time when Stukely and Dingley were doing their works, would have been a part of the cathedral that had escaped relatively unscathed from the Reformation. Furthermore, there were also two windows in Hereford Cathedral. I'm afraid I don't have an image of the one of them, which again depicts Becket and Cantaloupe together. The large southeast window in the northeast transept holds some restored 14th century glass depicting four saints. Now the saints are St Catherine, St Michael, St Gregory, and Thomas Becket. Unfortunately, these are all modern restorations from William Warrington from 1864, but it seems to be following the original scheme of saints that was celebrated. Other fragments of 14th century glass also survive in the south choir aisle, where we get figures of St Mary Magdalene, St Ethelbert, Hereford's other patron saint, St Augustine, and St George. It seems, however, that the figure of St Ethelbert came from just above the monument to Bishop John Trefnant in the south transept. And this is interesting because if Ethelbert has survived, you kind of wonder what else might have survived from that window. Because according to Thomas Dingley's notes on the window, this particular window had St Thomas Cantilupe, the Blessed Virgin, King Ethelbert in his royal robes, St Denis, patron of France, with his head in his hand, and that of the Holy Apostle Paul. So you have to wonder where Cantaloupe has gone out of this imagery of stained glass windows. But again, you've got Becket depicted in the stained glass window in Hereford Cathedral. You've got Cantaloupe depicted in 14th century stained glass. You've got them in probably 14th, 15th century wall paintings near to the shrine of St Thomas. You have Thomas's shrine, you have the Limoges reliquary. There is this symbiotic relationship between the two St Thomases. We also find further iconographical associations of Becket and Cantaloupe in funerary monuments. The first, of course, is this one, which is the monument attributed to Peter, Lord Grandison, who died in 1358 and is located where Cantaloupe's second shrine was, in the Lady Chapel, near to where Cantaloupe's second shrine was, in the Lady Chapel of Hereford Cathedral. Now, Peter's wish to be buried near to Cantaloupe, as well as his depiction of the fact that he has essentially the Hereford pantheon of saints on his tomb. At the left here, you have got Thomas Cantaloupe. You then have John, who had a chapel, a parish church in the cathedral, in the crypt of the Cathedral of Hereford. You have the Virgin Mary and Christ. Actually, no, that might be Ethelbert, sorry. Cantaloupe, Ethelbert, Mary, and Jesus, and then you have John, the Apostle, and then you have Becket stood here again with his cross staff depicted on Peter's tomb. Now, Peter Grandison is very interesting in these terms because there's actually a family connection, much like Nigel was saying about the Dunry family, Chilston being related to the Swingfields. The Grandisons were related to the Cantiloupes. Now, Peter's father, William de Grandison, married Sybil, the daughter of Cantaloupe's nephew, John de Tregose. And Peter was therefore Cantaloupe's great-grandnephew through marriage. So again, a family connection there. He's now buried where Cantaloupe's remains were translated about 9 years beforehand in 1349. There are further associations, of course, as well between the Cantiloupes and the Grandisons, which make this interesting, which is that Peter's sister Agnes actually receives a miraculous cure from St Thomas, from Cantaloupe in 1290. So while in the care of Roger of Pulston, Sheriff of Anglesey, Agnes fell ill and was believed to have died. And then Roger, who had also received a miracle in 1287, when his ships were saved from a severe storm, and he bent a penny and got the sailors to swear to Cantaloupe, etc. They were saved from this severe storm. He then likewise bent a penny over Agnes and promised to take her to Cantaloupe's tomb in Hereford Cathedral if she recovered. And she did revive, and the two came in pilgrimage in thanks. The other monument to consider really is the mutilated brass of Archdeacon Richard Ruddhale. Now, unfortunately, I don't have an image of this, but Richard Ruddhale's brass, Ruddhale died in 1476, and it's mounted on a board in the southeast transept of the cathedral. At his head, Richard is flanked by the small figures of Cantaloupe in episcopal robes with his crozier across his body, and St Ethelbert in armour holding an orb and a sword. In the second register of saints, you have St Catherine, but you also have St Thomas Becket, wearing episcopal vestments with his primatial cross across his body. So here we have Hereford Cathedral, where in various settings, whether it's in stained glass, in wall painting, in the offices of feasts, in monuments, well, especially later monuments, they are keen to capitalize on the associations between the two St. Thomases, between St. Thomas Cantilupe and between St. Thomas Becket. So there is this symbiotic relationship between the two of them, especially through the 13th in towards the 16th centuries. So likewise, we can talk about relics perhaps, because relics head out of Hereford into various places, but the most important thing is to continue with the iconography. So the Cantaloupe cult, as Nigel has already said, is one of the main factors for the huge program of decorated church building in Herefordshire in the 14th century. This has a huge impact on the fabric of the churches in the Diocese of Hereford. So the most famous instance of Cantilupe and Becket iconography, which Nigel has already touched on, and he knew that I would pick this up, is this beautiful stained glass window from Credden Hill Church in St Mary's Church in Credden Hill. Now, here we have Becket and Cantaloupe displayed side by side. You have Becket on the left in green vestments. You have Cantaloupe on the right in blue. There's an inscription running along the top, which forms a bit of a rebus on the names, on the shared first name of Thomas. You have Catuar, or Cantuar, really, for Canterbury, and De Cantilupo, Thomas de Cantilupe. So Thomas of Canterbury, Thomas de Cantilupe. The window can be dated, as Nigel said, to around about 1300 to 1310, according to the 17th century Silas Taylor. And it seems to have been part of a glazing scheme that was put into Credenhill Church and throughout a chantry chapel that was there as well, which is now lost, which was started by Philip Talbot in 1306. Now, Talbot was canon of Hereford Cathedral and Archdeacon of Shropshire from 27th of January 1300, which then explains his associations with the Cantaloupe cult. He is a very prominent churchman in the cathedral hierarchy. At the time that the window is commissioned, though, it's most interesting because the cult is still in full swing with pilgrims seeking cures. The papal bull ordering the inquiry into Cantaloupe's sanctity is issued on the 23rd of August 1306. And then between July and November 1307, a papal delegation sits in London and in Hereford to conduct the canonization inquiry. So again, Becket and Cantaloupe, reflected glory. You've got this window that is perhaps put in at the same point in time as the rest of the glazing scheme, dated to roughly 1306, a full year before the canonization process for Thomas Cantaloupe starts to happen. So what does this window show us? Does it perhaps show us that with this direct comparison of Cantaloupe as a second Becket, that especially in the Diocese of Hereford, Cantaloupe is already considered a saint alongside his namesake, especially in this period where this is imminent, where this canonization inquiry is imminent. Some of these images, I mean, I know I said that it'd be Becket and Cantaloupe. Some of these images are Cantaloupe on his own, because I think that it's really interesting to actually build up this corpus that many people might not actually know of in terms of decoration that St Thomas Cantaloupe is part of. So there are two windows in particular that I'm going to quickly focus on here without Becket, as well as another one which potentially contains an image of Cantaloupe, which Nigel has again already covered. It's the beautiful one at Eton Bishop. So the first image is, of course, this beautiful 15th or 16th century stained glass window from St Michael's Church in Munslow, where Cantaloupe is depicted alongside St Kenelm and St Anthony. Here he is in the left corner of the window, and here is the detail. So he's wearing a red coat with a blue jewel and a mitre. Another window which is interesting is St Roch-on-Wye. So alongside Cantaloupe are shown the figures of St Ethelbert, St Anne and the Virgin, and John. Plus dates from around about 1430. She recovered from the pool at Stretton Suggis, Herefordshire, when it's called for demolition in the 19th century. The glass was written by Bishop Thomas Offord, and he is depicted kneeling here at the foot of the Virgin, the feet of St Anne and the Virgin. So Cantaloupe again is depicted wearing ornamental vestments which have jacinth de lis and a type of flower design, with his right hand up in benediction and his left holding his crozier. There is another window which is very interesting, which is this at Cothelstone Church in Somerset, heading just out of the diocese of Hereford for a few moments. Now, this window perhaps can be associated with Becket in a way, because the church itself at Cothelstone is dedicated to St Thomas Becket. Here we have the image on the left of St Thomas Cantaloupe, again wearing white vestments with a type of sort of flower design. Becket is also depicted in another tracery light elsewhere. So the 15th century depictions that we have here in Cothelstone and Roch-on-Wye seem perhaps to be influenced by the way that Cantaloupe ends up being depicted wearing white vestments. And it's rather interesting that a 14th century list of cathedral vestments actually records that there were 2 tunics of white cloth worked with gold fleur-de-lis and lions in the possession of Hereford Cathedral. One of them actually does end up going elsewhere as a sort of relic, but it's very significant, I think, in those sorts of ways. But until such a time as another 15th, 14th century image of Cantaloupe wearing white vestments appears, I'm hesitant to say that we probably actually have a bit of a trope in terms of the way that he is depicted. But again, with Ross-on-Wye as well, if I go back to the Ross-on-Wye image, it's very interesting purely because from the notes from several different antiquaries, we know that there was another stained glass window commissioned by Spofford in the chapel of Streatham-Suggus, which contained an image of St Thomas Becket. So once more in Herefordshire, you have this iconographical association. You have Becket and Cantaloupe depicted together even in the 1400s and onwards. Cantaloupe did appear independently in other stained glass windows. Now, again, Nigel's already touched on Madley Church and the Dunry family, but the window that might have been here at Madley has since been lost. But there was a 14th century glazing scheme that was put in place in Madley Church. And this seems to have been endorsed by Sarah Brown in her examination of the 14th century glazing scheme, where the scheme can be dated somewhere between 1325 and 1400. So again, the exact period where we have the Dunry family perhaps endowing this chantry chapel, the Chilston Aisle. So this is a church administered in many ways by the cathedral authorities. It's a major site where where Marian veneration is taking off quite majorly, and there may perhaps have been a desire, especially with the fact that from what we know and what Sarah Brown picked out is that you would have had a chancel glazing scheme with Marian imagery accompanied by a figure of St Ethelbert. So in such a scheme, the recently canonized St Thomas Cantilupe would surely have been included in this scheme of depictions. Likewise, Lichfield Cathedral is known to have had an image of St Thomas Cantilupe. Thomas had been Archdeacon of Lichfield for a while, from 1265 until he became Bishop of Hereford. So again, it's interesting to see how far Cantaloupe imagery actually extends even outside of the Diocese of Hereford as well as within it. There's also this, which is Snitterfield in Warwickshire, which has a connection to the Cantalupes, again providing reasons for the depiction. So in 1228, Cantaloupe's father, William II de Cantilupe, secured the wardship of Marjorie Cumin, the daughter of William Cumin, who had held the manor. And in 1236, Thomas's brother John was married to Marjorie, so gaining it. John and Marjorie had 2 sons, Walter, who went into the church and was actually a witness in the 1307 canonization inquiry for his uncle's sainthood, and John II, who inherited the manor. So here we have the perhaps image of Cantaloupe once again depicted with a crozier, with these Jessamine de Lis on his robes, with the coats of arms, in stained glass windows in Snitterfield, which unfortunately again has since been lost. Now, Nigel's already touched on this window, but again, it's one that we might consider, perhaps considering everything that we've said about Cantaloupe connections and iconography of Thomas Cantaloupe and what he looks like. We might consider this potentially to be a representation of Thomas. So the window is dated to circa 1320 to 40, and it may have been commissioned, as Nigel said, by a chronicler who was actually a canon of Hereford Cathedral from the 1st of April 1320. So although he resigns his prebend at the cathedral on the 12th of February 1321, Murameth is actually a member of the cathedral chapter at the point in time where John the 22nd's papal bull canonizing Cantaloupe in April 1320 comes through. And then the bishop is depicted above him. In his examination of the window, George Marshall was dismissive about previous conclusions regarding the bishop's identity, claiming that it has to be one of the fathers of the church, such as St. Barnabas, and not St. Thomas of Hereford. But considering the timing of when the window is created, considering the fact that Eton Bishop is another church virtually under the control of the Hereford clergy, considering the dating of the central donor and the donor panel, could we perhaps see the resurgence of the local tradition that actually the bishop in the centre is St. Thomas Cantilupe, especially based on these bits of dating? Because again, it might well be like Sarah Brown has argued about Madley, that we have this local church controlled by the cathedral chapter, ensuring that their recently canonized saint is now depicted. Other pertinent things are there are several other wall paintings that we sort of know of, again, outside of the Diocese of Hereford. So we had two wall paintings at, so one wall painting actually outside Diocese of Hereford at the Chantry Chapel in Hambledon, where Cantaloupe was baptized, where there was a painting of St. Thomas as bishop, and it's perhaps we can associate that with Stukely's image that you saw earlier on, a similar image to what Stukely did. And then more significant is this image from St. Peter's Church in Barton in Cambridgeshire, which is dated circa 1350. And you can just about make out here one of the Jesant de Lis, another leopard's head impaled on a fleur-de-lis. So the painting was uncovered by E.W. Tristram in 1929. And in Tristram's account of the painting, he described that we have this, to the west of an adjacent doorway, St. Thomas de Cantilupe, Chancellor and Bishop of Hereford, depicted standing within a pavilion and vested in alb, amici, dalmatic, charged with wolves' heads, mitre and gloves, right hand raised in blessing, in the left a crozier, at his feet on the spectator's right a small figure kneeling in supplication. This description has also been taken on by the Royal Commission on Historical Monuments England and Sir Nicolaus Pevsner, so I'm not going to dispute them on this. So in general terms then, I know that this has been a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but in order to keep to time of around 40 minutes, I kind of just wanted to show you the iconography of England's two Thomases, of Thomas Cantilupe and Thomas Becket, and bring together this corpus of Cantilupe iconography that a lot of you might not have seen before or heard of before or recognize. And especially with the 2020 anniversary celebrations of both the Cantilupe and the Becket cults, I think that this examination has been quite timely. So it feeds in, as I said, to Nigel's talk about the fact that Cantilupe cult is this major source for the rebuilding schemes in the Diocese of Hereford. But likewise, it seems that the influence does extend in some regards outside of the diocese. Now, for why Cantilupe is depicted as Coffelston Church, I don't really know, aside from the tenuous association of Cantilupe with Becket, St Thomas Becket's church, Becket's in a tracery light, you have that kind of duality there. But again, why is Cantilupe depicted here at Barton Church, a church with apparently no connection that I've been able to find so far to Cantiloupes or to the Cantilupe family in general, and seemingly no connection to Becket either. There's no painting of Becket in the church like I would have hoped there would have been. So there is still much to be done on the iconography of St. Thomas, but I just hope that for 40 minutes I've managed to take you on a nice virtual tour of some lovely church paintings, stained glass windows, and just give you a rough idea of the Cantilupe iconography. And finally, I've had permission from Philip and Nigel to do this. This year, a little book came out that was authored by myself and the Dean of Hereford, Michael Taverner, on St Thomas Cantilupe. And again, this is through Logiston. So I thought that I might just put a little bit in there, because the Dean and I were going to have a launch event, which I think was going to be my Cantilupe talk, but officially that never really happened either. So I'm going to sneak it in here.
Ian, hello.
Hi, Paul.
How's it going?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. How
right.
are things?
Oh, well, I'm fine. Yeah. So, our first question is from Helen Watt, and she wants to know that obviously later on in the century, in York, for example, there are some miracles of St John of Bridlington recorded in the registers of the archbishops there. Are there similar kind of later medieval miracles recorded in the main kind of episcopal records in Hereford or elsewhere of Cantaloupe that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of, annoyingly. I kind of wish there were. It would be a distinct help if there were. The one. So the main miracle collection that we have is Exeter College Manuscript 158, held in Oxford, and that goes up really until 1312, and then just sort of stops when it trails off. And then in the very back of that, we have one miracle dated to 1404, which shows that something is still going on. And likewise, Ben Nilsson's examination of cathedral shrines also showed that that people were still going to Hereford a hell of a lot, and the cult declined and then grew again in popularity in the 15th, 16th century. We also know that there was a little bit of an unofficial cult in Lincoln, in the Diocese of Lincoln, actually, at Hambledon, at this chantry chapel that had been set up by Edmund of Cornwall. And the Bishop of Lincoln, Oliver Sutton, had to send one of his officials there to shut down this chantry chapel for an election saint, away from sort of the cultic centre in Hereford. So, I mean, I wish there were records of miracles performed elsewhere, and if any ever do come to light, I would be very, very interested in seeing them.
The Exeter College one is the one you wrote about in the Mortimer History, the journal essay, wasn't it?
Yes.
Where that's the one with, is it Roger Mortimer of Chirk's Falcon?
Yes.
That's a brilliant, an entry I'd never seen, but it's a brilliant one. So anybody who wants to know more about Roger Mortimer's Falcon, do read the first journal. Okay, I'll move on to our next question. So Connor asks whether you know the partnership of the two Thomases, is it unique, or do we have other examples of two canonized saints being depicted together in the same way?
I think the extent to which you have this crossover between Becket and Cantaloupe, the extent to which that Hereford seems absolutely hell-bent on moulding Cantaloupe as this almost second Becket, I think is one of the most important things. I mean, this certainly makes it tricky in other ways on deciding some other factors. So, like, one of the things that I have been working on with somebody else was the idea of pilgrim badges and pilgrim souvenirs, because of course Becket's cult had this massive range of pilgrim souvenirs. So is it possible that any of the bishop badges, which are just undiagnostic bishops, could be Cantilupe badges? Or there's a particular ampulla type, the Anderson type 2.30, which has got a fleur-de-lis on one side and a Lombardic T on the other. And there's several of them found in Herefordshire. and we know that Cantaloupe's bones bled when they came back from Orvieto, from Italy. So, you know, is there that? So there's elements like that in terms of pilgrim souvenirs and stuff, which we really need to look into. And when we do look into it, it might help inform more in terms of, is the Cantilupe Becket relationship something very specific, or is it something that we can apply wider? But when you generally look at sort of other saints, or at least when I found when I look at other saints, you go to York and you look at the iconography of the St. William window, you don't really see, you only really see St. William of York in it. When you go to Canterbury, it's only really Becket, maybe Alphege and Dunstan from time to time, but there's usually this particular focus on those particular saints, whereas in Herefordshire and in Hereford, it does seem to be this proper symbiotic relationship between the two, kind of just setting them up as namesakes. And
okay, great. So Jonathan Hopkinson asks, how many members of the Cantaloupe family and their extended family connections are represented in the listed miracles?
Oh, that's a tricky one. That's a tricky one. John Tragos, who's Cantaloupe's nephew, definitely gets a miracle. Agnes Grandison, who is related through, of course, John Tragos's daughter Sybil, receives a miracle. The Mortimers, again, which, as Paul said, I covered in that sort of essay prize winning entry in the first journal, but few of the Mortimers are actually related into the Cantaloupe family, sort of by various distinctions. The Breos is as well. So whether or not you count William Cragg's miracle, now William Cragg was the one who Robert Bartlett has written the fantastic The Hanged Man, story of miracle, memory and colonialism in 14th century England on. And so the Breos family associated with that are related to the Cantaloupe. So whether or not you count that as a Breos miracle or just William Cragg's miracle itself. Yeah, there's lots of others. I think one of the ones that Nigel picks up on, again, in Decorated Glory is John de Havering, who isn't necessarily related to Cantaloupe, but he's a lord. He has manors, I think, in Valchurch in Herefordshire, and he also has one of his own household who is cured of deafness by the Cantaloupe cult. And then he appears later in the miracle for Roger of Conway, a toddler who falls into. So I mean, there are wheels within wheels within wheels. There's 461 miracles to trawl through, and I've already trawled through them once, but I will probably trawl through them again because that is a very interesting question and could be a good article.
They're all in hardcore horrific Latin as well.
Yeah, so Paul, is this another question? Can I?
Well, I've got one more kind of. It's a point from Kirsten rather than a question. Kirsten wants to just wanted in noting that Hereford tried it with the cult of Thomas of Lancaster and tried to tie that cult to Cantaloupe as well with the story of Cantaloupe baptizing Thomas. I don't know whether Ian's got any comments on that. It was more of it wasn't a question.
No, I don't really have any comments on that. I think that's very interesting, especially because the Cantaloupe cult was also tied in some ways to the cult of Simon de Montfort, because there's that one miracle in Exeter College manuscript to do with Simon de Montfort, and Cantaloupe also had his own falcons and his own steward sort of receive health through Simon. So the idea that you've got these kind of political figures of Thomas of Lancaster, Simon de Montfort associated with Cantaloupe is a rather interesting one.
Yeah, sorry, just for Philip, before we go, that Rhiannon has just commented to me that it feels as if the very visible association between Becket and Cantaloupe is using Becket to justify the building up of Cantaloupe. She says he's not a martyr, but it's as if he is.
Yeah, in some ways, it's this idea of the red martyrdom and the white martyrdom. So Cantaloupe undergoes this internal martyrdom rather than a physical one. And I think part of it as well, trying not to go over too much because we got Tanya's fantastic paper coming up, but one of the things that I picked up on is the fact that Cantaloupe falls out bitterly with the Archbishop of Canterbury, John Peckham. And John Peckham is really not liked in a lot of places. And it seems that, Cantaloupe gets excommunicated by Peckham, goes across to Italy, dies. Beckham gets word from the papal penitentiary that Cantaloupe's been absolved, and he says, well, I don't believe that he's been absolved by you or the Pope. He's still excommunicate because he hasn't been absolved of this specific excommunication. And it seems that there's very much potential that the Hereford contingent, being Herefordian, kind of haven't taken too kindly to an Archbishop of Canterbury throwing his weight around in their nice little rural diocese. So it could be a bit of a middle finger up to Archbishop John and the Diocese of Canterbury, in a way, going, our Thomas is a better successor to Becket than Archbishop John is. But that's how it comes across in some ways.